Hey everybody, welcome back to NikkiT.live. I'm your host, Nick Taylor, and today I'm hanging out with Yaroslav Lapin, also known as JLarky on Twitter. So feel free to call him however you'd like to in the chat, as long as it's nothing profane, I guess. Uh, JLarky, thanks for joining me today. I know we talked about hanging out a little while ago, so really happy that we can finally hang out. For folks who might not know who you are, would you mind just giving I guess, a little intro to who you are? And you don't have to, but people are usually interested how people got into tech. So if you want to talk about that, go for it. If not, no worries.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for inviting me. It's a really fun opportunity to talk about this stuff. So yeah. In
Cool.
terms of like how I got into just like I guess like programming in general, it was it was a long road, and like from here I just like sometimes like forget about stuff. It took me
Okay.
like years to just remember that's like, oh yeah, in seventh grade I did write like a some like JavaScript application that was like calculating like the quadratic equations or whatever. So like I didn't know how to take like uh I forgot what I was doing, but like I didn't know how to do like conditionals. So
Okay.
it would just like show stuff, and it's like if there's error, it's just going to say like it's error because I didn't know how to check if. So it's like I
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
I did start uh, with actually like Pascal, and I did
Okay.
uh,
Cool.
kind of like a bit of like uh, I don't know. We call them Olympiads in Russia. I don't know, but like kind of like competitive coding, I guess.
Oh, okay.
So
Cool. Cool. I
and
like
so
that
it's
name.
yeah, so it was like a long kind of like long story, and I actually got my degree in physics. So it was like
Oh,
I
cool.
wasn't like doing tech for paid thing, and kind of like seriously, until I got a lot of my like degrees in physics and all that stuff. So
Okay.
it was like it was a long road, and like I started with, I don't know, like PHP and WordPress and all that stuff. So that's why it's like so funny for me to like to hear kind of like terms reintroduced and all that stuff. And it's like, no, but like that's not how we called it 15 years ago. Like, why are you calling?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the biggest thing that like my pet peeve is like PHP is not SSR.
Okay. Yeah. 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 That's yeah. The whole SSR thing's kind of funny because like SSR is like the OG web. Like that's like even like a static page. Back in the day, it had to be served, and like we have CDNs and everything now. But like yeah, server side rendering has pretty much been around since the beginning. I mean,
Well,
like
that's the thing is like I think the opposite. I think the SSR basically came out with like Next.js. Before Next.js, we didn't have SSR. This is
oh
going to
like
be
the term you mean, or just like
a
the
technology. It's
okay.
because like the shortest way of saying it is like we had server rendering, we didn't have
Yeah.
server side rendering because there was no other side. There was only server rendering.
Oh, okay, okay, I see. Yeah, 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 that's true. Like, cause like I remember when I started off, like my first website was like on GeoCities, and then like my internet service. Back in the day, internet service providers allowed you to host a website too. So like I had my index.
Tilde tilde like Nick slash something, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I remember I've told this before on stream, but like the old school websites had counters. When people would visit. And I remember finding an example on the internet. This is like pre Google. I think it was like webcrawler.com or something, um but I found an example and like, okay, I put it on my site and it wasn't working, and I discovered I had to call the ISP to say, "Can you give me read write access to the CGI bin folder so my counter will work?" And like you wouldn't be able to do that today because they just wouldn't have time for that. But yeah, but okay, I see what you mean. I guess, yeah. Sorry, yeah, I agree with your statement. It's more server rendering has always been there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 But it's going to be important once we talk about server components, because like the funny part about server components is that they are server rendering, they are not SSR. And
Yeah.
which is, it's funny that like the React guys would usually like kind of like talk about it, but everyone is so blind to the terms that they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So like I'm just going to ignore what you just said.
Yeah, 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 no, for sure. Yeah, and well, that's a good place to start. So I'm just gonna switch this to pairing view. You should be able to see this on the
Huh?
screen that I shared. So I'm just linking to the React server components docs. I'll drop this in the chat. But yeah, I guess let's speak a bit about React server components. And I'll be honest, I haven't. It sounds kind of funny, but I haven't really used them yet. Like when I worked at Netlify, I wasn't building applications. I was actually making sure the application ran. So like we had to make sure React server components work, but that's not the same thing as being a consumer of them. So I honestly don't have a lot of experience using them. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are on React server components.
Yeah, I think there are like two ways of looking at them, right? And it depends on like how old you are. If you remember CGI bins, like
Yeah,
that's like a bit like different way that you could think about server components. If you only like the thing that you only knew was like React and like SPAs and all that stuff, right? Like server
yeah,
components are a bit like more foreign to you and like whatever, right? So I
yeah.
think I will start with the second one. So like if you're going from like SPAs to server components, like how do you get there?
Okay,
So I think the best like way like the best demo that like to understand that explanation is the demo that like Ryan Florence did on React Conf. Is like,
okay, yeah,
hey, so we have like a page component, right? And that's
yeah,
that's the component that is going to render your application and then is going to like work on the client side, right?
yeah,
But if you need some data that like you need to read from a database, right?
yeah,
That's the stuff that you're getting from your loader. So loader only runs on the server, and if you need to like prefetch that loader, like you do like API call and like loader runs and it returns you JSON, right? So like
yeah,
loader only runs on the server. The page runs kind of like both places. It runs on the server for SSR, so like server side rendering, and then it
yeah,
runs on the client side rendering, right?
yeah.
So, and like the demo that he did, he just like put a component into loader.
Okay,
He's like, yeah, if your loader returns a component, that's server side render. That's like server components, right? So it's like you can have a component that is like, hey, just like go and like pre-render that tweet or whatever, right? Like all of that
okay,
stuff is going to happen on the server, but it's not going to return you JSON. It's going to return you basically kind of like a VDOM,
yeah.
right? And you can just
That's
like,
like the serialized React server component format you're talking about?
yeah. And you're
Yeah.
like, oh, and my like Twitter component, it's just like I'm just getting it as like as a thing. I can just like plop it as a child or like whatever, and just like it could just going to work. So that's like that's just like one way of thinking about it is or before that demo, like the thing that I was saying is like, imagine in Next.js you have like get server side props. Like
Yeah.
get server side props was your only way to run server only code, right? Like everything else
Yeah.
run twice. Get server side props was running on the server only. Now you have a way for your components to tell like, hey, this is a component that runs server side only. So it's server rendering, it's not SSR. So like you don't
Yeah.
that component doesn't have another side. It's just one side. It's just server rendering.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And yeah, there's limitations to server side props because like we like right now at open source where I'm working at, we're still using the pages router, and it trips me up every now and then because like, like I'll render some stuff that I want in get server side props. And sometimes I forget that when I change things, like the server side rendered prop value never changes unless you do a full page refresh, and it kind of throws me off sometimes. But like obviously that's a reason why like they're kind of going the other way now. Hey Todd, thanks for joining us. Also thanks Ryan for joining. Um,
Yeah, I guess that's
y-
that's like that's just a like another side of like caching issues, right? It's like, oh, but like I
yeah.
thought that I can like invalidate this part of it, but it's like no, I just get the whole object.
Yeah. So the React server components only render on the server, and it is an interesting distinction to make. There's also other things I'm curious about because like my old coworker Matt Kane basically built a static site generator using server components. So like you can actually consume them at build time to generate markup as well, which you're still using a server because like wherever you're building
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
still doing it like on the server. I don't want to say server side to just, but like basically the server is generating, even if it ends up outputting static, it still happens on the server. So it just another. The only reason why I'm bringing that up is because like I think the React the server and React server components name throws off people a lot, you
Yeah,
know. So
yeah,
I just
definitely.
wanted to call that out. So it's not just for dynamic server stuff, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So in that analogy, right, like the get server side props or get static props or whatever they were called, it's like it doesn't matter, right? Like whatever
Yeah,
that thing returns, it just now can return. And it's like it's funny that like Next.js should go that way, right? Like if they cared about like a bit like progressive enhancement or like all of that stuff, they would have done something similar like that. They're like, no, we're
yeah,
just like throwing everything out and just like starting from scratch, which is like of course good thing, but like it leads to a bit of like V2 V3 thing, whereas just like
yeah,
I see people who are saying like I'm still on next 12 because I don't care about server components, and it's like you can still update to 14. It's like it's not going to
yeah,
make you use it. So it's like why is it like so kind of like ingrained in people's minds? It's like you should stop next at
totally.
like next 12. It's like that's funny.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and it's like it's essentially like we're on version 14 actually at work, but we're still using the pages router, and
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
good call. It's a good call out because essentially Next.js is kind of bundling two frameworks together,
yeah,
you know. But like but I gotta say like hats off to the Next.js team for having backwards compatibility like since the beginning. Like as far as I know, like maybe not a version 1, but like, if you try to build a Next.js site that was version 9 and you upgrade, it should technically work still. Um, I've never tried that, but that's one of the goals of the project is to not break existing stuff. Um, as far as I know. Um, but so getting back to to the React server components. So like you were saying, it only renders on the server. And for those who that just joined us, we're trying to make a clear distinction between server side rendering and rendering on the server. And I don't know if you want to recap that again one more time, just because there's a few people that joined.
yeah. So I was just saying that like my pet peeve is that like when people say like we had server side rendering since 90s in PHP, and it's like no, you didn't. Like the SSR is like a new technology that like specifically means running client side applications on the server. So it's like it has to be JavaScript. So like
Yeah,
PHP can't have SSR. It did had like server rendering. So like the shorthand
yeah,
is like server rendering and server side rendering, right? I think
yeah,
back in time we called it like dynamic rendering or like server scripting, or like there were like a lot of terms, but like SSR didn't
yeah.
exist basically until Next.js.
Yeah, and it's also because it's full stack JavaScript. Like for example, like I did ASP.NET in the .NET ecosystem, so like it's rendering with C sharp ASP.NET templates on the back end, but there's no equivalent on the front end. So that's why there's a clear line because the tech stacks are completely different. Um, but yeah, and this is actually something that threw me off about Next.js initially. With speaking of the pages router, is I assume that only the get server side props portion ran on the server. But like when it rendered the page, like I thought that's all that happened, and then what was on the client side only ran on the client side, but the whole thing runs. And if you're using a hook, like I'm sure you know all this, but like when the it just threw me off initially because like the hooks would run, but because the way hooks work, typically there's a check like have I mounted or like am I on? There's ways to detect if you're on the client side, so those hooks would just do nothing on the first pass, and then when once you hydrated, then it was fine. But that was something that threw me off initially because I just assumed there was a clear separation, but the server tries to render the server side props as well as what you have defined in your page. So, anyways, that's just a little side note. But
Yeah.
oh,
Well, that was hard in terms of like people had a lot of problems kind of
yeah,
like switching to this like isomorphic kind of like idea, right? Of like now I need to run my client application on the server side as well, right? We
Yeah.
used to do that with like uh, Phantom JS or whatever. Like you would just go with headless Chrome
Okay.
and just like save thing, like render
Okay.
thing as a string, right? And it's like this way I don't
Yeah.
have to worry about that in my application. That's like another. I think Netlify
Yeah.
still has that option, right? Like the pre-rendering, like static pre-rendering.
Yeah. I haven't used it in the context of Go, but I think that still exists. Yeah. Um,
Well, I
uh,
think it's like for every application, there's just like a checkbox on Netlify. It's like that's from like older times when we try to pre-render SPAs. Okay, anyway, I think to kind of like to uh, illustrate what we're kind of like talking about,
yeah.
we can go to the we can go to that like kind of like demo application that I have, and it's
Okay.
like it's
Cool.
deployed somewhere, but I think you had it like running locally, so
Yeah. And
we can
I'm just
start
gonna
there.
drop this in the chat for people if they're interested. And so, and also Wesley Coder in the on Twitch says, "Hey." So thanks for joining us, Wesley. Um, yeah. So I'll just read what it says in the description here. So this is a Go application that creates React server components. So I'm really curious about this. So okay, so yeah, so that's the repo, and I pulled this down the other day. We chatted briefly in DMs, but so I pulled it down. It is a Go application. Excuse me. There's some requirements. There's a project called Air. I got that set up. This is all mentioned in the docs in the README. But if you want to run it, that's what you need to do. So I can go ahead and start it here. So I'm just gonna run Air,
Uh,
and I guess I'll let you speak to the project. So I have a site running on localhost 333 now, and I'll zoom in here.
yeah. So like this is I wanted to make it kind of like as tiny as possible, but just to kind of like explain kind of like what is going on, right? And it's like
Okay.
you're going to the page. Like, do you have React DevTools installed, by the way?
Yeah, I should. Yeah, I do. Okay. Here, let
Okay,
me
it's good
zoom
that
that
it
in.
works. So if you see that like the whole application is inside of like React, right? So like
Yeah.
it's the whole application is React application, right?
Yeah.
But I'm saying like, hey, I generated this SSA, sorry, S
SHA SHA
SHA,
T6.
yes,
Yeah.
SHA, I guess, yeah, SHA 256, right? It's like I generated it on the server, but like
Yeah.
this application is rendered on the like from the Go, but
Hmm.
it's all inside of React, right? Like
Yeah.
it's how is that kind of like possible? How is that working? How like what is going on? And
Yeah.
the thing we can probably go into if you just go to like view page source.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like some people are never learned about view page source. That's a whole side note, but okay, I'll
Yeah,
just do a line wrap here.
yeah,
Let
yeah.
me
I
zoom
was
down
going
to
to say that like
phone.
that's probably smart for this case, right?
Okay.
So in terms of like the application, you will see that it's very similar to any of like the SSR applications, right? Where Next or like whatever Remix, it's like
Yeah.
you will have everything as HTML first, right? So that's where like home, about, loading, I generated SSHA, like all that stuff, right? So it's kind of like in the middle of the screen right now, and then after that you have a script tag, and it's basically the same thing, but just like with a bit of inside of a JSON, right? It's like strike
Yeah.
element HTML, children, strike element head, right? So like the whole
Yeah.
application is rendered to the HTML, which is like kind of like SSR portion of it, right? But
Yeah.
then it also saved as a what people call like RC payload. So
Yeah.
you can think of it as kind of like serialized VDOM, right? Is like every React component, it has like a name and like a prop, right? And it's like
Okay.
so in this case, the props are like children, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you
And
have the
or
HTML here, and
yeah,
then the children in there is a head, and then that has children again, like the title and so on. So yeah, no, that seems pretty straightforward. the syntax, obviously the escaping the quotes. I mean, you never see this on the client side. This is just what's in the view source.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so it makes sense. So you've got so I guess the self dot underscore underscore RSC is is that considered the root of the app? Is that what's happening here? Because you're pushing onto it, or
Yeah. If you ever looked at this part in the in like next or remix, you will have some like kind of like next data or like remix context, right? So
yeah,
something like that. That is like just like an object describing kind of like everything that you see on the page in HTML. It describes everything as some sort of like JSON, right?
yeah,
And in this case, it's like it's doing similar thing. Why it's an array instead of just an object is that this is needed for streaming.
okay,
The
yeah,
idea is that your whole application might not be kind of like in one object. It could be like I have this thing, and then there's like unresolved promise, and like in that unresolved promise is going to be streamed into you like later. So that's the
yeah,
like that's why their array syntax is there, but
yeah,
it should look kind of like it should look familiar to you, right? Like if you ever
yeah,
worked with SSR applications, is like and again SSR, I'm defining it narrowly. I'm talking about like applications that are client-side applications that are rendered on the server side, like pre-rendered. Technical term that we had before. Now we just call it rendering. Um,
yeah,
so this is the thing that kind of like allows you to. Uh, okay, so I kind of like lost my train of thought. So
no, 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 that's all good.
like this is the basics, right? So like for every kind of like any application that is like if you want to see your whole application inside of a React root, like your whole application has to be sent twice. Like this called kind of like double data website. If you like I usually like to show like a Svelte blog, which is like Svelte is the best thing like ever, right? And you go to the Svelte blog and you see like your blog as an HTML, but then you're also sending everything as double data as like a JSON, so that you can hydrate it later, right? So like everyone
Yeah,
does it, kind of like except for Astro, basically. Um, so like this is kind of like a bigger point that I guess I can bring up is like React Server components in island architecture do a lot of similar things,
okay,
but they're like doing it differently because they have like a different limitations,
yeah,
right? And in island architecture, what you do is that like you don't send your whole kind of like root as this object. You send like just enough information for like each island, right? So like
hmm,
if I have like an interactive header, well, actually, like it doesn't need any data for it, right? Just like everything is going to be kind of like just like interactive as you click on it. But like for
yeah,
the blog context, if you like can like allow like an editor for the blog, right? You need to send like the markdown and like all that stuff. So it's like
yeah,
and RSC is like the biggest difference with them from island architecture is like you do send everything twice. And like, why do you need to do that? Because you're going to call like hydrate root on this thing. So when
yeah,
people saying that like React Server components don't have hydration or they solve hydration or whatever, they are lying to you. They just they're just talking about like kind of like one narrow thing that is like the code for like HTML tag, for example, right? You don't
yeah,
send that HTML code for to generate that HTML tag to the client inside of JavaScript. You're sending it inside of JSON. That's what they mean when they say you don't need to hydrate it. But of
yeah,
course, you need to hydrate it. Otherwise, you don't get like the DevTools thing where it's like everything is under
yeah,
React. Okay, so
yeah,
this is kind of like the first kind of like basic kind of like step in this. Kind of like,
okay.
does that make sense to you?
Yeah, 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 for sure. And yeah, no, it totally makes sense for the hydration thing, whether it's server components or something else, because you need the markup, and then the markup has to become interactive, and that's you basically it like it has benefits, but there's also like hydration errors are like the bane of my existence. It's
Yeah,
like, but
definitely.
the yeah, but yeah, no, it makes sense, and yeah,
Okay, so next, let's go back to the application.
Okay.
And the thing that we're going to do is that go switch to network tab.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, we need. Yeah, I think we're on the right tab. So now click on the
Mm,
about page.
okay. And you want me to leave it on fetch because it's going to be dynamic
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah, yeah,
right?
that
Okay.
should be fetch.
Okay.
Right.
Cool.
So
So we
let's
got.
click on that one.
Okay. I'm just gonna make this bigger. Okay. Cool. So
Right.
we've got a payload. We've got a payload here, which is another array. The quotes aren't escaped because it's not in the markup right now,
Yeah.
but it looks very similar to what we saw on the first page. So like again, I mean, I guess strike is your syntax for it, but again, it's the same thing. We've got the array with like basically the hierarchy of the HTML broken down into array elements with children. Like the HTML tag has the head again, and then the title, and so on, and title about. So this seems pretty straightforward. I guess is there something you want to call out here about the payload or?
Yeah. So where I'm going with this is that like the first kind of like part of what is going on here is that to like what is the benefit we're getting from like having everything as a React component, right? As
Yeah,
or like a RC payload, I guess. Compared to Astro, is in Astro, if you click on the link, you're going to do the full page navigation, right? Because like Astro doesn't have
yeah,
a built-in router. Well, they do now with like view transitions, but let's kind of like
yeah,
ignore that part for now, right? It's like when you click on the link, it will get the whole page and just like it will replace everything, right?
yeah,
So that's the biggest difference kind of like between SPA and like the MPA navigation, right? When you click on the links, does router do something or does the browser do something, right?
yeah,
So because the application like the three kind of like big parts of RC is kind of like RC payload is just like a way for you to serialize everything. It's
yeah,
router and bundling. So these are like three big features that like that has to be kind of like aware of RSCs because
hmm
that's like if you're implementing your own framework, that's kind of like the things that you're kind of like worrying about is like
yeah,
the router, the payload, and the bundling story. And like the bundling
yeah,
story is like the most complicated one. That's why I cheated.
yeah.
I didn't do it. We
Okay,
will get to some of that later, but like uh the again like the important part is the router, right? Like the router in RCs work differently, and you can kind of like in my case it's like 10 or like 20 lines of code, so it's like it's not that like super involved, but like
yeah,
you have to do that thing. And the biggest idea here is that like if your whole page could be described as this RC payload,
yeah,
when you click on the link and on about link, right? You can just
okay,
get what's the about page should look like. It should look like this. Okay, well that's fine. You
yeah,
get that RC payload, and you just like plop it to your React tree, and you say this is the new React tree.
okay,
Then like VDOM and like regular React reconciling kicks in, and it's like, oh, the head before was the same. Only the title changed. Oh, the like
yeah,
the all the stuff is the same. Only like this thing changed. So if you notice when you click on about,
yeah,
you see this like counter thing.
yeah,
It goes like it's like 2, 3, and so on. It's like
yeah,
this is a server side counter.
okay.
So this is a server state that is like, well, presumably like a database or like whatever, right? So like in Go is just like a global variable, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, no, for demonstration purposes, yeah,
So this is a server state which you got the new update when you did navigation, right? So like when you're doing something and like the data on the server changed, right? Like you want to get like the new data. So like how did we get there? So if you click
yeah,
around all of those things, you will find at some point there will be element that's called strike island.
yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe,
it's a deep one. Yeah, it's probably not
maybe it's
footer.
better to
No,
go
no, no.
into
You're doing
the.
good.
Okay,
Yeah, so
yeah,
click on the
okay.
div here. No, no, higher.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, this one.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so we got the my page is about. Okay, that's there. Okay, Strike Island. So here we go.
Yes, so this one. Yeah. So if you click on if you open it up, right, you see the server counter.
Yeah,
So that's
and
the
that's the
thing. Like
value.
if you would like inspect all of those fetch calls, like that's the thing that was changing. So like
Hmm.
this thing was getting the new payload, and it was like at first it was 0, then it was 1, then it was 2, and so on, right? But
Yeah,
the idea is that the counter is a client component. So it's the part that is like it's the part that uh in like Next.js, that's the page, right? Like the
yeah,
page component. So or like now with app router is like use client, right? So like that's the part that runs both on the like on the server and on the client, and that's the part that is like you are sending JavaScript for code for it. You're not sending like I'm not sending like div 5, right? I'm sending
yeah,
JSON 5, and there is a
yeah, yeah,
JavaScript code that renders that 5 into a div or like on the bottom in this case, right? So like
yeah,
that's where the border kind of like happens. That's where in Astro you would use like client load. In Next
yeah,
you would use like use client. So and like the way that you talk to kind of like to each other, right, is like as just as props, right? So like this server counter is just a prop that we're sending from this kind of like from the server component part to the SSR part to the like to the client component part.
yeah. And yeah, I guess to just to solidify my understanding here. So like we mentioned, so when we first navigate to the page, the RSC payload comes in. The
It
the
hydrates everything. Like like now the
Yeah,
application is like fully kind of like interactive, and one of the interactions there is like navigation, right? Like the router.
yeah. So like on the home, when we hit the home page, like when we first load up, it does the hydration, and then when I click on the about, the rudimentary routing that kind of exists, what happens is the new payload comes in, the VDOM does the diff, but there's no more like server rendering of markup at this point. Like
Yes,
if we think in the context of like a Next.js app, it's like you really only suffer from that hydration on the first page load, and then assuming JavaScript's allowed to run, it just keeps doing the VDOM diffs as you navigate around.
right. So when
Yeah,
you navigate around, kind of like two things happen, right? So like in Next.js. So one thing is that you're getting like when you click on the link, you're getting new data, right? So like for to know in order to show this like blog post, you have like a next and previous like button, for example, right? In order to show
yeah,
this blog post, I need to get like the text of that blog post, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
the other part is like I also need like code for that blog post. That blog post had like a chart, and now I need to
Hmm.
like to render that chart using like D3 or something like that, right?
Yeah. Also, thanks for the follow, Dylan. Hung out with Dylan on the live stream last week. We were talking about OCaml and all kinds of functional programming stuff. So thanks for the follow. But yeah,
Well,
no.
just to make Dylan happy, I did try to write it in OCaml.
Cool, cool. Okay, so yeah, no, this is super interesting, and like I guess like I understand the whole hydration part, and the reason why we went with you're using the array, it's because you have the chunks coming in, so you want to basically this is also to support streaming it in later potentially, right?
Right. I kind of like try to prepare for this stream and like try to fix streaming. It
Okay.
didn't work out. I have like a so when I was writing this thing, I wrote it in Go. Then I tried to write it in OCaml. Then I tried to write it in Gleam.
Yeah.
Gleam one got like a bit further along, but
Okay.
like the library that I was using for like web server, like it doesn't support streaming exactly kind of like how I need it. So
Oh,
it's
okay,
like
okay.
you can stream it on like on kind of like in your code, but it's going to be delivered as a one chunk, and it's like, well, that's kind of like
Okay, so
defeats the purpose.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, cool, cool, cool.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
okay. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yes, so this is like so this is like kind of like the router part is like is like a big is like a big part of like kind of like what's going on, and like how is React Server Compose like the same way as like we didn't have SSR until we had SSR, right? Like we didn't have React
Yeah,
server
yeah,
components. It's like people would say to you like, "Oh, we had the server components in like PHP," and it's like, "No, you didn't." It's like it's not the same thing. It's like being able
yeah,
to call like a database select a star from something right inside of your component is not the
yeah,
same thing as being able to hydrate all of it. And when
yeah.
navigation happens, you kind of like you render the whole thing through React. It's like that's not how PHP works. It's like it's kind of like
Yeah.
silly when people are going there, right? Because it's like on the ergonomics level, yeah, it's kind of like that, but like on the how it works, it's nowhere
Hmm.
like that, nowhere near like
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah. And this gets back to the point of like prior to like full stack JavaScript, like, the stacks are completely different. So there's no way to do the server side rendering and then the client side where it like dehydrates or it's connected somehow. Like aside from having like script tags that run the JavaScript on the client side. So yeah, this
Right.
is this is really something that, I mean, but I guess in your case, like your proof of concept, and I know you mentioned this before the stream, but the project we're looking at right now is highly experimental. So if things go boom, it's expected potentially. So don't be sending him mad DMs or anything. But
Yeah.
um,
Don't push this to
but
production just yet.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
think this is a good time for us to just go to the code and oh, high tech support.
Hey, thanks for the follow, tech support.
uh, so this is a good time for us probably to look at the code because like
Yeah,
if you ever kind of like touch tracks or components, you probably have like some like idea how it looks. But
yeah.
so the file that we want to go into, uh, I think it's called strike. Okay, I forgot. It's like it's strike and go something. Uh,
There's strike go or strike HTTP go.
okay. Uh,
Is it this
maybe
one?
let's start with main. I have like a really low resolution thing on my screen, so it's like it's a bit hard to
Okay,
follow. Yeah, no worries.
okay.
So this is package. Yeah, it should be an internal. Maybe it's like it's called handler. I should have had it like in my computer open somewhere.
Oh, no
So
worries, no worries. There's a
yeah, I think
suspense. Uh,
it's called routes. Sorry, it's called
okay,
routes.go.
okay, yeah, okay, cool.
Uh-huh. Okay,
All right.
so this is where the kind of like the magic happens. This is where like things go a bit of like from rails if you like ever touch this, right? So like
Okay.
if you're just like a person who knows how to write Next.js and someone goes to you, it's like, hey, we want to use React Server components and we want to use like we want to write everything in Go, like
Hmm.
now do it, right? The way that you would
Yeah,
do it is you would write a backend in Go, and like every time that you need some data, you would just like call that backend, right?
yeah,
Like instead of just like going directly to database, you go like and like ask some API to return something, right? Like you would
yeah,
write everything in React, and only when the places where you need data, you will like ask for the data, right? So like all the rendering is going to be happening in React and like
yeah.
in JavaScript and all that stuff. So here's the like where the router starts, right? If you scroll down a bit, there where the routes themselves are starting, a bit down.
Okay. Yeah. Also, thanks for
Yeah,
the
here.
follow, MB Tech World. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
no, so
So,
a bit
oh,
higher.
sorry, sorry. Okay, we
Yeah,
got
so
our
where we
gets
have
and our
like a
posts.
yeah get/about, right? So like, those are the two that we looked so far.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
so
And
so like you don't like that's the place where like next file-based routing and all that stuff would have kicked in, right? Like we are not doing that. We're doing manual routing. That's like how you do routing in Go, right? Like you
okay.
specify the thing that you need. Well, you could do like a kind of like a you could do it in like a kind of like a splat route. You can say like and everything like on this route is like React or
Okay.
components. But
Okay.
like for the thing that we're doing is like yeah, just like this is where the like this thing lives, this is where this thing lives, but like this is where like API lives, or this is where like health check lives, or like whatever, right? So let's
Yeah.
click
Okay.
on that RC handler. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
so this is like where server rendering, not server side rendering, server rendering
Yeah.
happens,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
So the first part is like where we're calculating as a SHA, right? It's 90. It's line 93, right?
Yeah.
So this is code that's like it's a Go code. It's generating the string. Like I could be reading from database. I could be like doing
Okay.
something else, right? It's like the application code. Like that's where you would like if you were writing it regularly. That's what would you put it there. But this
Okay.
part is also written in Go. The part that
Okay.
actually produces HTML, and again, if if people from a camel looking, that's like very similar to like how they usually write it, right? It's like this is how you would like say, hey, I have a bit of HTML. I have like a two links, and the href of this link is like slash, and like the child inside of that link is home, right? It's like so this is
Yeah.
just um I wanted to play with like I think it's called temple thing where it's like you write JSX, but then it like compiles to like Go templates, and it's like I could probably write something like that where it's like you write JSX, but it, like it
Yeah.
compiles to Go. I it's kind of like not important, right? It's like for to like to show what we're doing, and it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So you just describe your HTML as you would, and there's like there's a library called Go Components. This is like
Okay.
I think I like just like stole some parts of the syntax or whatever from it.
Okay.
It's like this is how you write HTML in Go if you want to do it like in a bit more structured way. If you just don't want to use like
Okay.
HTML strings, right?
Okay.
So far so good, right?
Yeah. I did have a question. So the H functions here, is that similar to like Preact usage of H?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's kind of like what I was going for. Go is like not as well, it's not as easy to do like a dynamic things, right? So like I have to
okay.
use like this H props and all that stuff to kind of like to make it kind of like work and Go. But
Okay.
like it's a very similar idea. This is like very much how they do it.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Okay. And then
And this is a bit
here.
of this is like a bit of kind of like the routing, right? So like for um uh we haven't seen that in application. If you scroll down like just a tiny bit,
Okay.
so that like the both of them are fitting, like the
Oh
island
yeah.
equals something and island equals something. Yeah, just
Yeah.
scroll a tiny
Okay.
bit more.
Here.
There's like another one there
Oh,
as well.
okay. Oh yeah. 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 Okay.
Go doesn't have ternaries, so you have to declare a variable, and then you just have
Okay.
to assign it inside of if, right? So like this is a bit of a routing that's like I'm doing different. I'm doing like a bit of different routing here for like for slash route and the about route, right?
Okay.
So in the first case, I'm just like I'm using the same. So it's called island. There's like a not a like a good explanation why, but like that's my kind of like use effect. Oh, sorry, use client.
Okay.
That's where my kind of like boundary between like server and SSR kind of like happens, right?
Okay.
And I'm saying I have a component that's called counter. This component takes those things as props, right? So like um, it takes like this state or
Yeah.
right server counter in on the slash and on about I'm actually incrementing it first and then I'm passing it.
Okay. Okay.
And
Cool.
the last part is like the interesting part. So like the last part is like where SSR kind of like comes into play. So you see one
Okay.
of them is saying loading dot 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 and the other one is saying like counter zero like something something.
Yeah. Is this like a you're creating a suspense boundary here, or what is it?
Well, it's kind of similar to that. Again, I had like another branch with suspense, all of that stuff. It
Okay.
doesn't work yet. But if you go back to application, I can just like show the difference.
Okay.
No. Like I mean,
Oh,
in the
oh, oh,
browser.
the actual app. Yeah, yeah,
No
yeah.
worries.
Sorry, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay,
So
cool.
if you refresh this page,
Yeah,
uh, you're on about right now, right?
yeah.
You see, do you know how to quickly like turn off JavaScript?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hold on a sec. Disable. There we go.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah, so now refresh the page,
okay.
right? You see
All right.
that like everything looks like everything works, right? Like we don't have JavaScript, but like the application works as it should. You now
Yeah.
go to home,
Okay.
Yeah, you see that it
Okay.
says loading?
Yeah. Okay. So that's okay, because that's what the server outputted and rendered, but the client side part didn't kick in to replace it.
Right. So, and the thing is, like on the other side, it didn't kick in either, right? So, like you got an application that is kind of like dead with dead HTML, right? Like doesn't have any client side navigation because the client side interactivity because like we turned off everything. But
Yeah.
sometimes you just wanna have like client only or whatever, right? It's like I don't care, like I don't want to render it on the server side. Just boot
Yeah.
it up once it's ready, right? And that's the like example with loading. And sometimes you want to say, well, actually, I want to have exactly the same data like on the server and on the first render on the client. So this
Yeah.
is like my kind of like a kind of like server only fallback, right?
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's like the term that I was using in the code. But the understanding of it is that like, well, if you have like a pretty complicated thing, you have like a drop down component or like whatever, right? And you want
Yeah.
to have that drop down be visible even if like JavaScript turned off, even like before hydration happens, you need to
Yeah.
find a way to turn that client side JavaScript code into a string first.
Yeah.
Like the easy way, you turn it into a loading dot 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 string. Slightly more complicated way, you just render the same thing as the client would render,
Yeah.
right? So if you go back to the code, that's where I do like counter like zero or whatever, right? Like if I do something here that like that mismatches the client rendering, you will
Yeah.
see this thing and then it like jumps to the like to the other thing. So like
Yeah.
I just made as much stuff I needed so that like it doesn't look like it's jumping.
Okay.
But everyone who's doing this sort of thing, everyone who is doing kind of like JavaScript thing, like using Go or like a PHP or whatever, that's where they would boot up some sort of like inertia JS or whatever. They will
Yeah.
boot up V8, they will render that client application to string, and they will like put that string here, right? And that's a
Yeah.
question of like, do you need it? Do you want to spend those extra resources of booting up V8? Do you want to
Okay.
use maybe like a real like Node or Dino or Ban or whatever because V8 like doesn't even have classes or whatever, right? It's like or
Yeah.
timeouts. I forgot. Like, but like V8 is like pretty bare bones, right? It's just like a question of like how much do you want to spend time on that? And I said no time on that. And it's like just render like the just render that part on the server with as much in Go, right? With as much like
Hmm.
granularity as you want, right? And like and the
Okay.
kind of like loading dot 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 is kind of like felt kind of like felt kind of like
Yeah.
enough for this thing. But that's where SSR starts. Like that's why I'm defining terms like that because we were doing server rendering all the way
Hmm.
up until we got to the like this island, and then we
Yeah.
need to do SSR. Then we need to take client.js file and turn it into a string. So that's narrow thing is called SSR. Everything else is just well, technically in RC there's like three kind of like
Yeah.
steps. So first step is you render it to basically VDOM or like RC payload, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Then you render it to HTML. So that's going to be like kind of like just lower in the code, right? And then you do like a rendering on the client of the client components to HTML. So that's the SSR. So again, it's no one probably cares about that, but that's kind of like that's technically the steps, right? So
Yeah.
like when I'm
No,
creating, huh?
no, I was gonna say it's important to make the distinction.
Well, again, like no one agrees with me, but I think it is. Right. So if you scroll down now, right. So that's where we kind of like building up the whole kind of like payload, right? We're building like the end. We are saying like page equals HTML, lang English, and all that stuff, right? Like that's why you're
Yeah.
seeing all of that stuff in the payload.
Yeah.
And if you scroll down more, so let's go to that RC handler function. So
Okay. Yeah.
that's where like kind of like two bits of magic happening.
Okay.
uh, so the first kind of like bit of magic is that when I go to slash about and I'm getting HTML, right? But when I
Yeah.
fetch slash about, I'm getting RC payload as JSON.
Yeah, I'm having flashbacks of when I worked at Netlify supporting Next.js. I remember the RSC equals one in the headers.
Yeah, this is
Anyways,
directly stolen from Next.
yeah. All right, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so um, and that's how the router works, right? Like the first initial load, it goes to the line 37, right? Like the
Yeah,
routing kind of like thing goes through line 35, right? Like that's basics of like how it works. You have your, it's called RC component, right? On line 31, it's just like you have
yeah,
your kind of like application, and now you need to render that application. So we
yeah.
can start with probably like HTML. um,
Okay,
yeah, so this one,
cool. All
right?
right.
So
Okay,
yeah, so the two things that we're doing, and it's only got available in React 19. So I really like this idea. So
okay.
hydration errors in React now work a bit differently. The idea is that, so if you have your head component and you were sending like 5 tags, you were like meta something, title something, like script this, but then
Yeah,
like some extension kicked in and it added like 10 more scripts in React 18. What it will happen is we'll say, hey, I rendered 5 scripts. Why am I seeing 15? You are
yeah,
bad at your job, like hydration error, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
What is going on with React 19 now is that it will see the 5 scripts in your JSX, right? And it's like, well, that's the only 5 scripts I'm carrying. Like, I'm not going to check
okay,
all the 10 other ones. So it made life kind of like much easier for like
okay.
for
More
hydration.
forgiving.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and this is a trick that I'm using when you were doing your application. You and when we were like looking at the page source, there's like
hmm,
import maps, there's like a rc underscore, like all of that stuff, right? It's like
yeah,
you're not providing any of that stuff in your application. This is kind of like a bit of like the opposite of like how Remix does it. In Remix, you
yeah,
would have like a script tags, right, or like a meta tags or whatever. So like you
yeah,
would tell us like, hey, this is where the framework stuff comes in, and it's like if I remove it, like I'm not going to get any like the framework stuff.
yeah,
And so that part is the trick that I'm using is I'm inserting it as that like sixth and like seventh link and in whatever. So it's like React
okay,
will actually ignore it during the iteration. So when you're looking at your like React components and the dev tools and all that stuff, you will only see the parts that like related to your
oh, okay, okay,
application.
okay,
All the framework code is hidden, and it's not going to be checked for the hydration mismatches and all that stuff. So this
okay,
is like a funny kind of like aside. I haven't seen anyone do this yet, but like this is like the thing that I was just like playing with React Native, and I was like, this is so cool. I can kind of like hide my framework, and I was like, I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
want to fix hydration errors on those like import maps. It's like it's only needed on kind of like initial like first server rendering. Like, why do I even like care about that, right?
yeah. No, I'm so glad they fixed those rehydration errors because it's like a lot of times it's like I know it's giving the error, but I honestly don't care so much. Like I understand the reason why they show it, but like, I don't know. Like I think
Well,
one of the places,
uh-huh.
yeah, sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that like it was a choice, and I think Solid is like it chose the other thing, right? So like it was a choice.
Hmm.
Like, what do you do when server data and client data doesn't match up, right? Because
Yeah,
you could just like say, well, I will only kind of like I will only care about the stuff that matched up, and like the rest I will ignore, right? Or
yeah,
something along those lines. Or you can just say this like, I will always going to ignore it, right? Like if the client side
yeah,
is like doesn't match the server side, well, let's just believe that the server side had like the right idea, right? And this is
yeah,
going to be like the cheapest kind of like solution. But what React is doing right now, they're saying no. If it's a mismatch,
yeah.
we will do some of this magic with like the like only checking the first ones, but like after
Hmm.
that, all the issues that you're doing with hydration did me that means that like the server version was wrong. You like
Yeah,
misconfigured it, or like it was got from like old cache or whatever. Like we don't trust that version. we will re-render your whole application on the client side, because like the client side at least is going to be consistent, right?
Yeah,
And it's especially kind of like makes sense when you're like doing this whole thing of like the whole application is under React now. So it's like, to
yeah,
be sure that I'm doing what I'm like, I know what I'm doing. It's easier for me to just get rid of everything and kind of like start from scratch on the client side. So like, but like that was a choice that they made, right? So like they could have
yeah,
said is like, yeah, we always trust the server and just like ignore that part.
yeah, yeah. No, it's always trade-offs, but
Yeah,
yeah, I think excuse me. I guess one of the things that drives me nuts about the hydration errors, and I know why it happens, but it's like we have a responsive page, and like when the page renders server side, obviously it has no concept of the size of the browser window, so it's like I know why it gives the error, but then and then you just we typically put it we're using like a client only component that wraps it and just renders the children
right.
once it's mounted, which I know it can be improved. TK Dodo was talking about using use sync external store, I think, instead. But that's a optimization I need to look at some point. But
Yeah,
I
I
think
think it's just
that's
it's
where
like
I
a
almost see it.
couple of
Yeah,
milliseconds. Yeah,
yeah. But that's where I've consistently seen the hydration errors, where it's like we have a mobile view and like depending on the dimensions, and that's almost always where I've seen it, and then basically I have to say like this whole chunk here is client side rendered only, and that can be good and bad depending on like what kind of page you're serving, like, but because like I don't know. Anyways, that's been one of my main pain points, and like I don't know if it's just urban legend, but I had heard that the React code base actually has like a if Google Translate extension is loaded, don't do anything. I could have somebody could have just been making that up, but I just remember hearing that about a year or two ago. But that could totally be urban legend though.
yeah,
But
that makes
anyways,
sense. Yeah, so like the important things kind of like to look at here is yeah. So like this rewrite head is the thing that I was mentioning. So like line 53 is like where we convert
yeah,
components into JSON,
yeah,
and then if you scroll down a bit, there will be a bit more.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's like render to string, right? So like, and that's where
yeah.
we render everything to HTML. So the like the the most important, in my opinion, thing about this kind of like whole thing is that
Hmm.
HTML is produced in Go. Like
Yeah,
I'm using like real language. Again, like depends on like how you how much you hate JavaScript. But like if you're uh funny aside is that like I was thinking like the Go is going to be like super fast. In my experiments, Gleam turned out to be like twice as fast, and like
okay,
Erlang is not the best at like string concatenation. So I'm sure I'm
okay,
like doing something wrong, and like the real Go developers can like know how to improve it, how to like profile it, and all that stuff. But
okay.
it's better than JavaScript, right? Like that's not a high bar to to
Yeah, yeah,
well, except for Marco. Marco is like stupidly like fast, and it's written in JavaScript somehow. But like all
yeah,
the other ones are like not that high bar to hit, and it's like, well, that's it, right? Like I got from like the routing, like that we're looking at that routes file, right? Like all the way
yeah,
down to HTML without touching JavaScript once, right? Like without touching
yeah,
V8, without touching like any of this stuff. So this is
yeah.
the like the value prop of this kind of like approach is that like if you want your app to be rendered on the server
Hmm.
and you want to use React router, right? So like when you click on links, it navigates client side without server side, right? Like if you
Yeah,
want to do that, that's how you do it. You generate
yeah,
that second time like your application as JSON, and you just hydrate it.
yeah. No, this is super cool. It's like, and I totally feel this. It's not the same problem, but like when I was working in .NET, we were we were tasked with building like a starter kit for like e-commerce site in ASP.NET. It was the ASP.NET MVC. Um, but um, the templating language in ASP.NET is Razor, and then like we were looking at like how to have some kind of client side interaction so that these things could work together, kind of like basically rent render the same template on an ASP.NET, like literally write the templates in a certain language and then render it on the server, but then also be able to use those if you needed to load dynamic templates. And so we ended up with, this is like when handlebars was more popular. Like that, this was back when like we were using on some other stuff. We were using like Angular 1.43, I think, or Angular JS, not even Angular. So just to give a this was back in like 2015, 2016, and we basically ended up writing a handlebars templating engine in .NET. Like I'd found a project. There was one, I think it was like handlebars.net maybe, but it wasn't that great. And then we found another one, and then like we just ended up porting it, and it kind of it. The reason why I'm bringing it up is because it comes back to what you were saying about render the markup in the server language you're using. Like in your case, it's Go. This was ASP.NET, and we were able to render the handlebar templates using data pulled in like you would use handlebars on the client side, but on the server side, on the server end with .NET. And then when you got to the client side, you could still use those handlebar templates. And again, it's not exactly the same thing, but it, it's the motivation to not, because there was this project, I forget what it was called, but you could basically run node in a process, and you could have said like, you know, render my pass in some data, render the handlebars template through this node process, get the string back, and then that's what you server render. Which is, it was slow and so like not viable, but just a testament to like what you're saying here. You want to
Yeah,
work and Go, but like you still want to build with React. So
yeah, and I would say that like a big kind of like inspiration for this thing was this framework called Bud.
okay,
It's written in Go, and like for templating they use like Svelte syntax, Svelte 3 or 4.
okay,
It doesn't have like 5 yet,
okay,
but they are using like this whole like V8 and just like kind of like and it's like a tricky thing of like, well, what if I want to use like this like Svelte thing, right? Well,
yeah,
now I need to boot up uh, npm, install
yeah,
it, and just like make
exactly,
sure that it's compatible with this like runtime that you have and all that stuff. So it's like the jump to like how much JavaScript you're going to have is like very quick.
yeah,
And this is like a funny aside is that if you notice those import maps, I'm
oh yeah,
not uh,
here I'll bring it up.
npm installing React.
Yeah,
This whole application is no build, JS doc, kind of kind of. I still have like a tons of like TypeScript errors in it, and it's like it's hard to clean all of them up. But it's like
yeah,
it's like no build. You don't have like V8 on the server and all that stuff. Like when you're
yeah,
deploying, you're just deploying the Go part. Everything else you're just like getting from a ESMSH, right? And like I'm using
yeah,
React Error Boundary, right? Like third party, kind of like a dependency that's like pulling
yeah,
in from like npm,
ESM,
right? And I'm
yeah,
not even using JSX syntax. It's like this is like another way of like getting rid of the build step.
yeah,
I started using React before JSX was a thing. TypeScript
okay, yeah,
didn't support it for a while, so for like 2 years of me using React, I was writing React without JSX. So it's like that's completely fine. It's just
yeah. I remember when I was working at Autodesk, we we were slowly bringing in React, and there was, I can't remember the reason, but there was this boundary where we couldn't use JSX because it was, the backend was Rails, and so we for like a small portion of things, it was React dot create element, do whatever,
Uh-huh.
because it's valid as well. Like the JSX, like is just syntactic sugar. It's definitely better DX if you're writing it in JSX for sure. But yeah, and there's even other interesting projects that Jason Miller, who created React, he has one. I think it's called HTM, and you can use template strings, and then it parses the JSX. But yeah, that's super interesting. You're using the imports map here, which
Yeah.
is which is pretty cool because like I can't remember how long that's been standard, but it's definitely been a few years because like Dino was like Fresh, for example, which I've given a talk on it a few times. They use the import maps, and mind you, I read something recently. I don't know if you saw it. Dino was talking about like URLs for imports might have been a mistake.
Yeah.
so so I only skimmed that article. I haven't read it fully yet, but so maybe they're backpedaling. But
I read that article. It's I kind of like I follow a lot of those things kind of like along. It's I was like one of the like few people who like used Bon when it was like really early, and like you would do like Bon install and it like would just like segfold out on you. And I've
yeah,
been
yeah,
following Dino for a while. I really like their hosting solution, which we like Netlify uses, right? So
yeah,
it's a pretty interesting thing, and it's like the end result is that like the article is talking basically like, well, we realize that HTTP imports are really cool at like kind of like one-off scripts, is like where you have like a couple of
yeah,
dependencies, and if you want to go to have like a CI step, if you want to go to production, that falls apart pretty quickly. And it's like, yeah,
yeah.
we knew that from the start.
Yeah, but there's interesting things about the import maps, and I misunderstood this initially. Like here you have like Strike Islands, you have React, etc. And I like when I first started working at Netlify, I had his name's escaping me. He created Fresh initially. Luca Casanato. Um, I was like, oh, okay, so these are like aliases like in Webpack or Vite, and he's actually like, no, they're actually URL redirects, which like it makes sense now when he after he said it, but like just looking at it on the surface, it totally looks like just an alias. But I wonder how that fell apart in terms of the CI/CD pipeline, because like you could say like I'm still using React DOM, but like just upgrade the import map path to the actual. So I'm gonna have to read the article just to get the full
Yeah.
understanding of
Well, in
that.
my case, right, like I don't have like that step, right? Like I don't run JavaScript on the server, so it's like for me, it
Yeah,
like kind of like doesn't matter. It can only break on the client, right? But like if you have a CI
yeah,
and you're go and like ESMSH is down right now, it's not going to build, right? It's like, and the more the like HTTP imports you have from different places, right? So like this is from JS delivered, this is from unpackaged, this is from ESMSH, this is from Dino, like land, right? So it's
yeah,
like once you have like 10 of those, if any one of them has an outage, now your whole kind of like CI is stuck, right?
yeah. No, totally. Yeah, yeah, it's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I
It-
guess yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
And
so
like somebody
I
could
think
even yeah.
I think like in the last maybe like few minutes, let's go and look at that like JavaScript for a
Okay.
bit, because
Yeah, yeah.
because I think like yeah, maybe someone is like watching this and it's like, I still don't get what you do with JavaScript. And
Yeah, yeah.
let's go there. So if you saw in the import maps and all that stuff, the kind of like the input point is like bootstrap.js. It doesn't mean directly
Yeah.
bootstrap.
Yeah.
It's like a first line. Yeah, the module
Yeah.
preload strike bootstrap. So that's kind of like a
Yeah.
framework code to kind of like to get everything in. And
Okay.
yeah, just search for bootstrap.js in the
Cool.
editor.
Okay, cool.
Right.
All right.
So again, this is client side only. I don't have like a SSR step. I don't have like any server infrastructure for all this, right? And it's like when I'm
Yeah.
saying import React from React, that means that import map like redirect that to ASM.js, right? And I can
Yeah.
do question mark def to get like a def version, so the
Okay, yeah.
errors are better and all that stuff. In production, I don't have to do the like the underscore sorry, question mark def. So it's like
Okay.
Like that's the build step. It checks if I'm in dev or in the production. So
Okay.
so you see the like the biggest kind of like thing that like that I have the biggest problem with is people saying you don't hydrate server components, right? It's like if you go to this page, right, like it only has like one component and like you can just like remove it, right? It's like
Yeah.
if you remove that counter component, that page will have zero client components, and yet
Yeah.
still it's all hydrated the whole application because of the routing. Only the
Okay.
stuff that's inside of React can be changed when you change a route. If you don't put title inside of React, you can't change title when you go to another page, right? So like that's the
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
like the difference between Astro. Is it like in Astro, the title you would set it on the server and only on the server. And if you need to change it like somewhere down the line, you need to go document.title equals like something, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
React is not responsible for the whole thing. So hydrate the root is the thing that takes the whole document, head and body, and puts
Hmm.
the root inside of it. And I'm using JSX function. That's the syntax if you don't want to use um, you don't want to use the build step. And
Yeah.
it's basically the output kind of like of the any of the build steps that you use.
Yeah.
React.create element is safer because like it's like compatible between versions. JSX is like a bit more finicky, but I
Okay.
love to live on the edge. So
Okay, yeah, and just to reiterate why you're not using JSX here in the build step, it's because you have the import maps. There's literally no bundler running at all, which is why you
right.
need to use these things. Yeah.
I
Okay.
could have like this file could have been like .tsx, but then I would have to convert it to .js like every time that I update it, right? So like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
way, this way I can kind of like skipping the that step, and it's like
Yeah.
yeah. So this is like appealing to people who hate JavaScript, right? It's like just don't have a build step, don't have npm and all that stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and uh, the the kind of like the another part that I want to show is there is a file called errorc.js.
Okay. Oh, yeah. All right. See. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. You want
Just
to go
need
to
to
the
check that
TypeScript
it's.
one?
I just need to check that this is the right one. Yeah, no, I think the TypeScript is just like declaring types, so that's like what you
Okay.
use in JS docs. It's just like easier to write. Like the syntax in TypeScript is just easier to write. You just like reference to it. It's not like easy in like some other issues, but like it's kind of like fine enough. So if you
Okay.
scroll down a bit, there is like this function called like something something chunks. Maybe like search for chunks.
Initial chunks promise or
Probably yeah, chunks to GSX. That's the fun part. It's line
okay.
36, right?
Okay.
So this is I guess like yeah, chunk to JSX. Because this
Okay.
is like this is the part that does streaming. So like it will get every line of the JSON file and or like an array and like turn it into JSX. So
Okay.
go to the one that's like on the yeah, it's the next one. Scroll down a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Chunk to
Yeah.
JSX.
Yeah. So
Okay.
this is the part that does the like I got this JSON on the wire, right? And now I need to explain React what is going on. And I think if you watched Dan Abramov's talk about
The
React
two
Server
reacts
Components,
there.
no,
The
no, like before that one. He
okay.
was. I think it wasn't a talk. It was like a yeah. I think it was an article. It was an article of like how to implement React Server components from scratch. Like you will
Okay.
see that this is like very much like the thing that he was working on. So let's
Okay.
go to that from JSON thing. Yeah, I
Okay.
forgot that there's like five levels of five
Okay.
levels of like imports. Uh,
Yeah. Whoops. I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm sorry. My keyboard shortcut was messed up. Is it this
no
one?
worries. Yeah.
Ah, forget it. Whatever.
you
No,
can, you
there's
can
a.
just you can just click around and like follow
Yeah.
the definitions.
It's called what again?
It from JSON.
Okay, there we go.
Uh-huh.
Cool.
Yeah,
Oh
so
yeah,
like, go to the implementation.
yeah, sorry about that. Oh, weird, it's not finding it. Okay, let's. Oh,
Oh,
it doesn't
sorry.
appear again.
It's parse model string. This is my fault. Again, it's like it's a
Okay.
bit like tiny on my screen. So
Oh no. Oh yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, it usually shows up okay, but I'm not sure why. Okay, so
Yeah.
here's the parse modal string. We've got our context, parent, and key value.
Yeah, so the context is like where I store like all the like promises and all that stuff. Like we're gonna kind of like ignore it for now, but like the important part is like that JSON that you are getting, right? So like if this JSON is strike element, I'm
Yeah,
like converting it to JSX, right? So like the line 168, right?
yeah.
So it's like the first thing is the name. So it's like if it says head, that's the head. If it says body, that's the body, right?
Okay, yeah, yeah.
And if and I'm passing all the like props to it and all that stuff. So on the go part, as long as I'm just like saving the name, saving the props, I can just like send them to React, right? And
Okay, yeah,
there is like a special one for strike text. I think like in real React they just like check if it has like special prefix or whatnot. But like
okay,
the part that is like interesting is I guess like island.
okay, yeah, yeah. Here,
So I do kind of like a thing that you need for islands is like you need a reference to JavaScript implementation, right? And
yeah,
that's where the bundler story is. I was like telling that like the bundler is like one of the like most important parts is that when you generate your RC payload, like
yeah,
the kind of like the part of like hydrating that thing in is looking at like what JavaScript components you are using, right? And it's like,
okay,
if I'm using counter, send the counter. If I'm not using counter, like don't send the counter, right? It's like it's the part that like you can do that in React, kind of like nowadays with just like React.lazy, right? But that
yeah,
creates a lot of waterfalls. It's like, oh, I have this component. It lazily depends on this one. It lazily depends on this one, right? Like until you like resolve all of those like lazy components, you're like keep getting like more and more stuff. But what you can do, kind of like in the React Store component side, is you can kind of like calculate all the permutations. And this is like a big kind of like thing that like if you go to Google and you like type 2 plus 2, it knows that you
yeah.
need to get like the calculator kind of like JavaScript for it, right? It's like,
Okay,
how does it know it? Well, it tells it that like once there some kind of like sort of routing happened, right? Like it tells it's like, hey, here's the data that you need for that component, and here's where the code is for that component. And that's kind of like what a
yeah,
lot of like relay was about, is like sending JavaScript along with the data that you need for this particular
yeah,
query.
yeah. It's pretty wild that actually. Yeah,
Yeah, and this is like a big, again, like we were doing React Store components in PHP. No, you were not. It's like you were not doing this thing where you were defining like what JavaScript needs to be sent for each thing. That's what Wiz or like those like fancy frameworks that like only Google has, right? Like that's what they are
yeah,
doing. But like you were not doing that in PHP. That's
yeah, yeah.
so
You're
so
basically serving HTML. That's all you're doing in PHP.
Yeah, and in my case, I'm actually skipping that part. All of my client components, they're just like defined in like in some like a global thing. Um,
Okay.
let me try to remember the name for it. I think it called islands.js. Can you,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Here we go.
yeah.
There's two actually. Islands. Oh,
There's
there's
like
the
another app, so maybe yeah. I don't
Strike
see it.
Notes public app. It's probably this one, just assets, I think.
So you see that like it does like import from Strike Island on the first line,
Yeah.
uh, like the very first line.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Sorry.
So that's
Yeah.
using the import maps. So my thinking here was that like you can kind of like once you're using it as an application, you will just declare your islands with like some like exact name, which again I kind of like didn't do. Um, so yeah, let me just remember. Let me just remember where it is. I think that's probably kind of like the last thing that we will look into.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
For sure. Side note, but this is all really super cool. Just it's I'm pretty impressed by all this.
yeah.
Just to give you a
Okay.
little pat
I
on the back.
found it. It's called app.js. But like this is the
Okay.
the kind of like the script that is booting it up. So it's like the
Okay.
island is a thing that like does the kind of like the suspense and all that stuff. So like it will render the fallback. wait for hydration, and then it will render the client side version of it.
Okay.
Again, like the real deal, the real like serialization format and like real like way that how they're hydrating everything is like much more complicated. It's relying more on like React internals and all that stuff. I was
Okay.
like doing everything kind of like as like I can explain how everything works in my thing.
Hmm.
If you're doing it as the way that Next.js works, you're just like, well, and at this point, you just trust this component that like source code for it was never published. You just trust that it works, right? And it's like, well,
Okay.
that's like not fun to kind of like to do like educational project, right? To like to explain it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you search online for any like how to build RC from scratch, I think Ben Holmes recently like did one. It's like they all are
Yeah.
using this like hidden like webpack something component, and it's like, well, like that's, I don't know how that works, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so this is the like the this is this because how ugly this looks, that's why I'm kind of like positioning this thing as like, well, if you kind of like think that you are going to do everything in Go, and there's going to be like a tiny bit of thing, and you kind of like want to have this like client side router, right? Like that's what you
Okay.
want to use. If you want to use client components, this is where like the story kind of like falls apart, right?
Okay.
Because like that's the API that I'm giving you for now, right? Like you
Okay.
can define a component, you can say like, hey, I have a component, and if you're using like a kind of like a third party thing or something like that, you can like import from esm.sh and all that stuff, right? Like it will all work. It's just not going to be kind of like nice to write, and like you don't have the SSR
Yeah.
step, so like you don't have the pre-rendering step. But it's like if the thing that you want to do is just like a thing that like toggles like dark and light theme, right? It's like just write it, right? So like just
Yeah.
like the or even like what you can do is just like you can just like don't have client components at all. You can just
Yeah.
render like a web component, right? And just like add your script that like does the like interactivity and all that stuff. But I just wanted to show that like this is a real thing. It actually
Hmm.
does the RC thing. It actually has the client components, and it
Yeah.
actually preserved the state, right? So one thing that we
Yeah.
kind of like didn't do in the demo, right? Like if you click on like on the thing like 5 times, that's the
Yeah.
client side router. That the, like the set counter 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to enable JavaScript now.
Yeah. I refreshed. Okay. Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
clicking here.
So if you click it around and now you go to like home, about, and all that stuff, right? Like that
Yeah.
7 is going to be say preserved. And it's like it's pretty hard to do that like in Astra or something like that, where you have like MPA navigation, right? But
Yeah.
like if you have an iframe that like is embedded YouTube playing, like you get all of that stuff for free. Not for free, it's 100 kilobytes of JavaScript for React, right? But
Yeah.
it's like you get it out of the framework. And like the thing the like the way that it talks to you, right? Like if it needs to re-render it, it sends you the like server counter 9, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. So here it is.
if it sends you key, it can like reset you, right? So like if the key changed, like the component will be recreated. But it's like it's just a standard like how React works. Like you don't have
Yeah.
to invent anything. So it's like you can write everything in Go or Gleam or a Camel once I have time to do that.
Yeah. No, this is no, it's super cool. I'll just bring it to chat mode here. No, it's like I know you were saying like the server story falls apart. Sorry, the client the islands part falls apart. But honestly, I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. This is like super. Well, one, it works, which is it's cool. But also, I think it's like you said, the main goal was to like educate. Like this isn't a full blown implementation. Like I'm sure if you had more time and you were motivated to, I'm sure you could do it. But like I think this is just I think it's really well thought out. I think it's also a good proof of concept to say like you can build full stack apps where you lean on your favorite backend language too, like
Right.
and like I don't know, I don't think there's no spec like GraphQL for this or anything, but like I'm there is some semblance of a spec even though it's in not mentioned, you know what I mean? And like I think if that was defined, it could be super interesting for the React ecosystem because like right now there's stuff like you were mentioning because I was hanging out with Josh Sear from the Laravel team and he was showing me like their equivalent to Hotwire. The name's escaping me.
Yeah, it should
Or
be LiveWire. There-
Livewire, yeah, sorry.
There's like Live View, which is like the original one, like from Phoenix.
Yeah, from Phoenix, yeah. So there's Livewire, but then there's also like you were saying, like the inertia part, where that's just really allowing you to use client side stuff, but there's a disconnect between
And I would
what's
say that
happening.
like for inertia, it's kind of like very similar to get server side props. Is like the get server side props, you can write that, and that's how BOD works as well. Is like that
Hmm.
part you can write in your native language. It will be converted to JSON, but then the whole rendering is happening in JavaScript anyway, right? So like that's
Yeah,
that's that's the kind of like the biggest difference on the like the authoring side is like you
yeah,
don't return JSON, you return kind of like let's say JSX or like IRC
yeah,
payload, right?
yeah. But there's still a disconnect. Whereas, like for example, in your example or in Strike, you're actually rendering a React server component that knows to hydrate. Whereas the inertia, I haven't used it, but like from my understanding, it really is like you said. You can generate the markup on the server, but aside from putting some hooks to say like this should be connected to this thing once you're on the client, it's not truly connected. I think I could be getting that wrong, but
I haven't
or not.
played with this too much myself, but like my understanding is that like it basically does the like it gets server side props thing. So like
Yeah.
you can send like data to your JavaScript application as long as it's JSON.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess what I mean is like you could do that, and then like you render whatever on the server, but like the the client side React components could not be compatible. Like if you're writing it, you're probably gonna make sure that it maps to it. But like that's all I meant. But yeah, I need to dig into it, before I
Yeah.
start making super false claims.
Yeah, and I would say like it's closer to kind of like what you get out of Astro, right? It's like uh
Yeah.
it's like it's good until like you try to do routing, right? Like routing is not done like inside of React if you're using React, right? Like it's done kind of like on the like Astro level or like inertia level, right? But
Yeah.
here it's a bit of like inverted thing because like you were saying like, hey, and here's everything hydrated to the React root. Whatever like the router you're going to have, that's the router like written in React. So this is like funny how you can kind of like how you can treat this in terms of like who is in control, right? Is React in control
Yeah.
or like is Go in control? It's like, well, in
Yeah.
that case, it's like kind of like Go, like in the case of Bud or inertia, right? It's like, well, Go is in control. That's the thing that's calling like V8 and to render it, but
Yeah.
you can't like kind of like route from it, right? Like here
Yeah.
is like I'm doing everything from Go, but like the actual like React router is the thing that like fetching those like new pages and like updating
Yeah. It's
everything, right?
connected to it. Exactly. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
totally.
And
Yeah.
it's
So I
funny
know.
that like I actually once I did this thing, I actually was kind of like researching on like, can you use again like because everyone's like, oh, but like we had the receipts like from 90s, and it's like you don't.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
can you use something else except for React to do this, right? Because like every time that like something like this happens when it's like a new feature, like the first wave is like we don't need it, right? Like when the hooks showed up, it's like we don't need it.
Yeah.
The second wave is like we already have it, like yesterday
Yeah.
you didn't need it, but now you already have it, and it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're like, well, but if you squint, it's like if you look at like view refs, it's the same thing as hooks. And it's like, okay, well, sure. Uh,
Yeah.
and the third step is like they will create something that is like kind of like a cargo cultish. It's like it kind of hits some of the checkpoints, but it's like it's kind of like not the same at all. So for
Hmm.
example, like when the server components happened, it's like Nox added server components or
Yeah.
like but that's not the same thing, right? Or like they added like um I forgot the thing, but like they will have something that is like that's not it. And
Yeah.
the thing is that like no framework as of this moment have what React server components have, and like React is the only thing that can do this because like I would prefer to write this as it was like solid or something like that, but like they just don't have the same concept. They don't have the
Yeah.
like the same kind of like mechanisms or whatnot. And in case of solid, they will probably like they'll never have it because like this thing will kind of like rely a lot um on the like a VDOM diffing, right? Like the thing is that like
Mm,
it gets you the whole new page. And if you
yeah.
don't have a VDOM, it's not like, oh, I have an element and I need to update the style tag. It's like, no, you just have like a whole new page and you need to figure out how to reconcile it and how to figure out that only the style tag changed, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that's why it's just like funny for me when people are like, yeah, well, already have that. I was like, no, you don't.
Yeah. No, it's no, it's a good point. Um, but yeah, who knows? Maybe server signals.
Well,
Um,
that's like another thing, right? So like I think I think and again like the a live view is kind of like that, right? It's like, well,
yeah.
we already sent you thing, and then like we have a protocol to kind of like to update it, and it's like much more kind of like pinpoint and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
and again like my backstory is that like I was writing a application that was using like a framework that like existed before live view even existed. It was in Erlang, and it was like
Okay.
we were doing all of this stuff like in 2010 or something. I forgot 11, and it's like, yeah, it's just it's a way, kind of like it works, but it has its own limitations. And again, it's like it works kind of differently, but it is similar to RC in the sense that like that's the thing that's kind of like responsible for routing. So like if you want to change the page, that's the thing that you need to like tell tell hey
Yeah.
change the page. Okay. So I don't know, like we have like maybe like a few minutes for questions. We didn't get too into the bits, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot.
No, but
It's still a lot,
it's super. It's still. I said it before, but this is just a super interesting project. Just as a, I know you kind of did it as a proof of concept, but I I think there's a lot of learnings there. Like even if you don't do Go, like I've done a bit of Go like a long time ago, but like it it makes sense everything you said. Like I'm definitely gonna have to give a rewatch, but um I think again it gets back to what I was saying where it's like where people can't it comes back to what I was saying about like the ASP.NET thing where like we couldn't be a full stack JavaScript application because like it was a Microsoft shop. It's .NET. Like you know what I mean? Like it like from a technical standpoint that would never happen at that place. So like I think I think that's where I see the value in this is like, oh, you write things or you do Java or you know, and it's it's possible to actually say like, you know, obviously it requires some effort to make a more stable version of this kind of thing, but I think that's where the value could be and like that could, you know, I I think for the React ecosystem, it could definitely give it a boost. Like people are saying like React's kind of like king still, but like not much movement. Like React server components is obviously super new and stuff, but like I don't know. I think it could increase the longevity of React if people started adopting those things in other backend languages. So that's where I see the value. I mean, I don't I don't think it's necessarily something the React team would embark on because like they're you know what I mean? Like they're in the JavaScript ecosystem, but I think it would be cool if they could somehow surface, or who knows, maybe somebody's just got to use Claude AI or something to say, generate me a spec for how to implement RSCs in any language, you know. But I think that's where the value would be, you know. But that said, like I still think it's super cool that you went through this exercise and it again it works. Like obviously, like you said, there's some things that you know like it falls apart at some point, but like it's I don't know, it's pretty impressive to be honest, seriously. Like so
right? Well, and it's I think like in terms of falls apart, right? It's just a question of like, well, now that I have React, like how much of React do I want to pull in, right? Like, do I want to pull in this
yeah,
like library for a drop down and whatnot? And it's like, well, if I'm pulling in that library from drop down, I need to have Vite, I need to have like a TypeScript compilation step, I need to have like npm
yeah,
install, right? So like it's just like the more you go there, the more it requires. And that's why it was like funny for me is like to do it, and it's like, okay, I could add like a build step here, but like I won't. Okay, I
Yeah,
could
yeah,
like do this thing, but like I won't. So like I want to see how far I can take this one. And it's like,
yeah,
uh I think if you're like talking to someone, it's like, hey, I'm doing like Go, right? Like what I want to
yeah,
use. And it's like I can tell them, it's like, hey, you can use this thing because like it doesn't require you to have like a build step. It's like your application is still going to be Go. You're just going to have
yeah.
like a few like static files, right? So it's like, but your router now is in React. And it's
Hmm.
like if you know that it's a thing that you like, right? If you want to have kind of like SPA kind of like style, is like you click on the thing and like the fetch
Yeah, yeah,
goes out, right? Like if you want to go there, I think like that's like the kind of like the best tool. The problem is that like a lot of the kind of like the back end front end split that happens, right? Is like it's on
yeah,
the like I don't want to touch it at all, right? It's like I want to
yeah, yeah.
do everything in my power as long as there is no JavaScript. I even use JSON, right? I will even use GraphQL. Like I will use everything as long as it's not JavaScript, right? So it's like,
Yeah, yeah. No, I gotcha. I gotcha. Cool, cool. I dropped links where folks can give you a follow. I also dropped the project again. Check out Larky's Strike. Um, yeah, Yaroslav, this was super cool. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day. I know you got a hard stop in a few minutes, so I think now is a good time to call it, I guess. Yeah, there's also, yeah, I dropped links where you can give Larky a follow. He's, I don't know. I got confused. This is a side note, but I got confused initially because you followed me on Twitch as Parasocial Fix, and I thought you Parasocial Fix and Larky were two people at one point. So, anyways, that's just a side note.
yeah,
But
no
anyways,
one, yeah, no one saw them in the same room
yeah,
at
yeah,
one point.
exactly,
So
exactly. One's got glasses, the other one. Anyway, anyways, cool, cool. Well, thanks everybody for in the chat for the stream today. Thanks again, Yaroslav. And if you don't mind, just stay on for 1 second. Everybody else, Monday, hanging out with Keith Kurak from the Expo team. We're gonna be digging into all things Expo. So, cool. Later,
thanks.
everybody, and